Commissioner Del Rosario will be arriving around 7:30. And Commissioner Lavendel is out sick.
Oh, sorry to hear that. Okay, let me just get something set up a little better. Okay. Are we live? Terrific. Welcome to the Transportation Commission meeting for this evening. And I need to switch screens. Excuse me while I go and get to my agenda. Right. So as a first matter of business, in calling this meeting together, I'd like to make our standard acknowledgement. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Lejeune. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and to together build a better future for all that now make this their home. Thank you. Mr. Freed, could you take a roll, please?
Yes, Commissioner Peng, if you could unmute and speak. Thank you. Vice Chair Graham.
Here.
Chair McCroskey.
Here.
Commissioner Jamandel is absent, and Commissioner Del Rosario will be arriving later.
Terrific. So let's start off with public comment. And this is a time for members of the public to make comments on items that are not otherwise on our agenda for the evening. And unless we have a lot of comment, we usually allow about 3 minutes. Oh, and in order to comment, we ask that you use the raise your hand feature that you'll find at the bottom of your device or on one of the screens if you're mobile. And we already have a couple of those. So whoever's managing that, please admit the first commenter.
Jeff, I'm seeing that I don't have the power to let people speak. You could do that, or Justin. Oh, there we go. Serena, go ahead.
Hi, this is my first time coming to this meeting, so I'm not sure exactly the process, or if you've discussed this before. But I'm worried about the emergency egress on Hillside Avenue. As you know, Hillside dead ends into that large, lot with eucalyptus that connects to Albany Hill Park. And there's dying trees and debris and homeless camps at the base of the hill on Cleveland and Pierce Street sometimes. So I think it's pretty high fire risk. Since the street dead ends, and there's lots of parking on the street because a lot of the houses are multifamily rentals, there's one-way traffic, especially at the curve near Catherine's Walk. Multiple times I have to back up and let a car go by the opposite direction. There's been a couple times where an ambulance has come for a medical emergency for the neighbor, and we've either been stuck on the other side of the hill or stuck by our house. So clearly we would, if we had an emergency at the same time, we wouldn't have been able to get help. So basically I was wondering if this group could consider some solutions. So, if there ever is a fire in the park, I'm wondering how a fire truck would get to the fire at the end of the street while residents are trying to evacuate. It doesn't seem like it will work with all the cars parked. So the red curb that you just approved is great for trash and fire to turn around. But something like that, maybe on one side of the street near Catherine's Walk, would be helpful, so that if a car or a fire truck is trying to leave, we have the option to drive up on the sidewalk to get by. So that's it. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments.
Next is Miriam. Go ahead.
Hi. So I haven't been to this commission before either. I'm here because I wanted to focus your attention on a project that was approved yesterday by the Planning and Zoning Commission. They've recommended approving a project that allows a mixed-use building of 12 apartments and 3,000 square feet of office space, medical office space at the corner of Solano, Ordway, and Tacoma. And we're asking the Traffic and Safety Commission to evaluate the impact of this proposed project on the intersection, because we think that the building will generate heavy pedestrian and vehicle traffic without providing significant parking. And this building will only exacerbate an already dangerous traffic and safety situation at this intersection. The intersection was already recognized as dangerous by the Complete Streets program, and they made an extensive recommendations for the redesign. But the P&Z seems to want to go ahead, and we don't quite understand the logic of placing a greater burden on this intersection before the recommended changes are performed. So we're basically asking that the Traffic and Safety Commission evaluate the impact of the proposed construction, and hopefully before the permit goes any further. And we'd like to see a traffic and safety study performed and conducted to evaluate the safety of both increased pedestrian traffic and vehicle traffic, and the lack of parking, because there's no parking provided at all in the whole, other than actually 2 spaces, but only 2 spaces for all medical and all residential parking in a very busy and overly burdened intersection, which is irregular and unsafe. And we think all these decisions about traffic and safety should be postponed. Actually, all the studies should be performed before the decisions are made. And we should be waiting for results of these studies before the construction is allowed to continue. So we'd like to put this on the agenda for the next meeting of the Transportation Commission. Thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, I don't see any other comments.
All right. Let's bring it back to the commission. I would just mention, since a couple of members of the public mentioned that they were unclear on the process, the commission cannot discuss items that are raised in this public comment period in this meeting because they're not agendized and notice has not been given. There's a period at the end of the meeting when we discuss what we put on the agenda for subsequent meetings, and we can bring those items up at that time. Great. Let's move on to the next item, announcements. And the first announcement is the welcoming of Commissioner Peng. Good to have you join us. Mr. Freed, did you have a brief bio?
I was going to give Commissioner Peng an opportunity to introduce himself to the commission. I wasn't going to do that.
Great.
Hi, can I speak now?
Yes, please.
Oh, hi, everyone. My name is Peng. I usually go by Nelson. I was appointed by City Councilwoman Janelle Gary. We had a great conversation about the city's road safety and the vitality of the community. So I'm really honored to be appointed as Transportation Commissioner. Very little bit about myself. I moved to Albany, in March last year. And my office is in Berkeley. So after moving here, I finally be able to bike to my work and drop off my kids along the way. So every morning we enjoy a fun ride and really love this community. Professional-wise, I'm an urban designer. In the urban planning field, we call ourselves new urbanists. Basically, what we try to do is to kind of shape communities around pedestrians, bikes, and transit. So we'll also try to deal with the fact that the American cities are built around cars for almost half a century. So that's what I do. A great chunk of my experience before the pandemic are international projects, but I believe here Albany is really lucky to have a lot of commissioners who will play a vital role in relevant agencies and city staff that's really knowledgeable about the city. So my hope is that through this position, I can learn from everyone and I can know the city better and serve the community to my best knowledge and effort. That's all. Thanks.
Terrific. Well, your experience and your fresh outlook are welcome. Great. We have several other announcements, and the first is the local road safety plan website. And you want to start that off, Mr.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that the website is live. It's albanysafestreets.com. And so please help spread the word. We're soliciting places of concern. There's an input tool where people can drop a pin on the map and submit areas they want us to take a closer look at.
How long will this website be up?
We plan to have it up at least through May. We'll be working on the data analysis piece and continuing to collect community feedback as the consultants look into areas that they're going to focus in on for more scrutiny. So
Great.
At least another month, maybe a little bit beyond that.
Okay. Yeah, and I would add that this is a way for us to capture data that is not numerical and based on accidents that have happened, but on how people feel about the way places are at Albany and whether they feel comfortable there or not. You know, if you choose not to ride your bike or walk somewhere because it feels unsafe, then there probably won't be any accidents there. And we're unlikely to improve it unless we get that information some other way, like through this survey. So I encourage everybody to go on and drop points and explain how you feel about locations that have been frustrating for you in whatever way. Any other commissioners want to add to that, or not seeing any? Then this weekend is the Albany Community Expo and Compost giveaway.
Yep. The other announcements were just upcoming events. The Compost giveaway is this Saturday. It's at a new location on Masonic Avenue to be next to where the Community Expo is. So folks can pick up compost this Saturday along Masonic in the northbound direction adjacent to the community center. And then from 10 to 2 will be the Community Expo. There will be activities and representatives from various departments talking about different ways to get involved.
So I have to call you on this. When you say in the northbound direction, you mean if they're rolling up with a car or a bike?
Yeah, so the compost giveaway is for large quantities of compost. So it is geared towards, as most people have come to pick up via car, or I think there have been a few people picking up on bike. That is going to be from the travel lane.
When we used to have it as part of the Arts and Green Festival, some people will come with forklifts and walk, and it's right on the Greenway. So you can bring a wagon and get a couple bags.
Yeah, we are encouraging folks to walk or roll to the Community Expo. There's going to be food vendors and a lot of adjacent parking. So we're encouraging folks to get there on foot or other means from driving.
Terrific. Yeah, there was a large number of no parking signs around that block already in preparation.
And the other announcement was May is Bike to Wherever Days, and May 20th in particular is the Bike to Work Day this year.
Great. With that, let's move along to the monthly police data.
Thank you, Chair. So reporting on the month of March, there were 2 pedestrian vehicle collisions reported. There were 2 collisions involving cyclists reported. There were 14 overall vehicle collisions, 5 of which were injury collisions. 25 moving citations were issued. And 3 DUI arrests were made. That concludes the report on police data.
Are there any commission questions based on this data? Commissioner questions? I see Mr. Commissioner Peng.
I just look at the Albany SafeStreets.com. For that program, it indicates, I think, where and what kind of collision is on the map. I think geographic information is really helpful. Is there any way we can incorporate this data onto a map so people understand where it happens and what happened? That's all.
We do I think a yearly or bi-yearly review of the data in which it's also mapped out. It turns out to be a little cumbersome to do that on a monthly basis.
Oh, I see. So by the end of the year, we'll see a map.
Yeah, so the monthly data that comes from the police reports is directly from our police department. That data does get reported to a state database that gets mapped. So there's a lag in that, but we're able to pull that collision data, which is also what the consultants for the local road safety plan are using. It just has more of a delay. So we look at it spatially on a yearly basis and then monthly to get a sense of the overall trends and have a little more up-to-date information. We discussed the reports, the collision reports from the previous month.
All right, thanks.
Also, that information, I believe, is available on SWITRS or the SWITRS database, and anyone can access it with that delay as was described. So we look at it as a group once a year, but it's available to anyone anytime.
Thanks.
I'm not seeing any commissioner question. Other Commissioner Graham question? No. Is there any public comment on the police data? You would use the raise your hand feature. Not seeing any. At this point, we do this kind of back and forth for those who are new and our new commissioner. So we start out with commissioner questions, we go to public comment, and we bring it back to the commission for commissioner opinions and comment and recommendations. And those can be informal. For something like this, you might have a request about something or point out some point of interest that you care about. And this is a good time to do that. So are there any commissioner comments on this data? Seeing none, I will thank Mr. Freed for the data, and let's keep moving. Our next item is the consent calendar, and it has one item. If there are commissioners who wish to make comments or changes to the minutes from last meeting, this is the time to pull the minutes from the calendar, from the consent calendar, and bring it up as a discussion item. And I believe members of the audience can also request that. So if there are members of the public who wish to pull the minutes, this is the time to raise your hand.
I move that we approve the minutes.
Seeing no comments, I agree. We have a movement. And at this point, Commissioner Peng, the chair is supposed to facilitate, but not propose most of the movements, if you're familiar with this sort of meeting style. Since Commissioner Graham has proposed the movement, it would be great if you could second it. If you were
I'll second. Thank you.
Terrific. Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Mr. Freed, could you take a roll call vote?
Commissioner Peng,
Aye.
Vice Chair Graham,
Yes.
Chair McCloskey.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Terrific. The consent calendar is approved. That moves us on to item number 6, discussion of, and starts with discussion of the long-term Parklet program. And we have a staff presentation.
Hold on one second. There we go. Thank you, Commissioner Chair McCroskey. Tonight, I'll briefly review the background for the long-term Parklet program and then walk through the proposed guideline elements and discussion questions we have for you tonight. After reviewing our next steps, we'll open for questions and comment. And if the commission concurs, I'd suggest going section by section for the commission discussion and comment, and I can pull up the slides again or restate the questions at that time if useful to get detailed feedback from you tonight.
Mr. Freed?
Yes.
Since we've changed composition of the commission, and I don't know where Commissioner Peng lives, it may come up later on as well. Does he live within 500 feet of Solano Avenue?
Let me measure it. Actually, that's a good question.
You could do that during the presentation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Wait. Do I live within 500 feet of Solano Avenue? I think I might. And we didn't talk about this last time, or it didn't come up. So, and I don't know if it's a problem.
I'm not sure either, but let's figure it out.
Do you want me to Google Earth it?
Could you?
I guess I can.
You can't, I can.
Yeah.
Just let you know, I'm out of the 500 feet radius.
Sorry?
I live outside of the 500 feet radius of Solano.
Terrific.
Oh, sorry.
Justin, do you have my address?
I should. Let me look. Hold on.
Hold on, I can have it up. I mean, we didn't talk about this last time, and I guess I don't know if it's a problem.
You're right, and I'm not sure it is either.
Oh, well, I guess I took that from your comment.
It's something I want to be aware of. I'm not sure it's critical.
Well, I would say I live exactly 267 feet from Solano Avenue, so.
Is that which portion of Solano Avenue? Between San Pablo and
yes.
Okay, and Berkeley.
Jeff, do you want to jump in here? I mean, we're looking at this as a policy for the entire city. It's a citywide program. I mean, it will have potential implications for particular business establishments, but we're looking at this as a program.
Citywide.
Right. I kind of doing some quick research on this question. My first reaction is that this wouldn't be the type of action that would constitute a conflict of interest, unless you individually feel like a particular installation is affecting your property values. But as a program that affects the overall city, I think at this point you're okay to participate. But as you continue the discussion, I'm just going to do a little bit of background research, and if I feel like I need to correct myself, I'll let you know.
Okay, so I can stick around.
Stick around. I would say stick around, and I'll just come back if there's any issues of particular concern.
Thank you.
Please do stick around. I wanted to bring it up, but it sounds like we're in the clear, and I apologize for not bringing this up offline with staff previously. Mr. Freed?
Thank you. So background on the program briefly, the temporary parklet program started in June of 2020 when outdoor dining became a permitted activity under the county public health orders. It was designed for maximum flexibility to enable as many businesses as possible to utilize outdoor space to remain open for business safely. The city has issued a total of 18 permits, 15 of which are in place today. The installations have spanned much of Solano Avenue between San Pablo Avenue and the Berkeley border, with a cluster on both sides of the street west of Cornell Avenue and a series on the north side of Solano east of Key Route Boulevard. There are blocks with no installations and blocks with 1 to 2 installations, and even up to 3 if you count exclusive like sidewalk area, sidewalk seating kind of uses. We opened the discussion of a longer-term program with the commission in September of last year. Since then, we conducted surveys of businesses and community members in December and January and presented those results to the commission in January. Feedback from those generally emphasized an interest in improved safety, access, and durability, and balancing different interests in the use of the public space, but predominant support for the program. We had over 1,300 responses to the community member survey and over 100 responses from the business survey. The draft guidelines separate out the requirements by section, and I'll walk through those in greater detail now. And we're also posing questions related to some of the decisions on various elements, which I'll talk through. So the first set of requirements relate to location and placement of the parklet. It's basically limited to commercial areas on Solano Avenue. San Pablo Avenue is under state jurisdiction, so we can't directly permit uses in the parking areas along San Pablo Avenue. We're proposing 1 to 2 parallel spaces or 2 to 3 angled spaces be eligible for an installation. Utilizing parking spaces that aren't red or blue curb designated areas. We're proposing the default to be within the footprint of the existing parking spaces and including 1 foot setbacks from neighboring angled parking spaces or 2 feet from parallel parking spaces and a 2 foot setback from the travel lane, and requirement you could either by location and placement maintain access to utilities or in the design later on provide access. And so those are the guidelines we're proposing. The key questions to talk through, I think, related to that involve the adequate use of existing parking spaces to deal with the question of setback and visibility from crosswalks and curb ramps. Some of the other programs we've compared to give a flat like 20 feet from an intersection approach or 8 feet from a crosswalk, so some different ranges there. Whereas we're starting with, if it's an existing parking space, we're allowing a car to be in that space. You can propose a parklet in that space, but we could consider being more conservative as this is a built installation or giving additional scrutiny to the visibility beyond that. We're also proposing, consistent with our temporary guidelines, 1 foot setback from other adjacent angled spaces. Most of the other jurisdictions we've looked at have a higher requirement for that, 2 to 4 feet for adjacent spaces. That would significantly cut into the utility of an angled space and sort of precipitate needing more spaces. We think that it's not really a safety issue per se, it's more of a minor collision or sort of scratching or sort of making it easier or harder for maneuvering in and out of the parking space. So we're recommending keeping our existing 1 foot setback on the angled spaces. But we think that's worth discussing and talking over tonight. On the parallel spaces, we are recommending increasing to 2 feet. And as I'll discuss next, having a wheel stop in the other space to help with that buffer if it's a parallel installation. We have one of those. Are some locations that we have parallel parking spaces along Solano, but angled spaces predominate. The other element of this that merits discussion is we're proposing limiting to a maximum of 2 to 3 spaces, angled spaces, or 1 to 2 parallel. Other jurisdictions have taken an alternative approach or an additional requirement related to the frontage of the proposer to mitigate potential conflicts or concerns with adjacent businesses, or how much you can, if it's not limited to the frontage, how much beyond your frontage you can go. So that would be another alternative approach there. And then the other component related to visibility is regarding the seating and sidewalk areas. The guidelines essentially leaves it to staff review with regards to access, visibility, considerations. But if we want to make it more strict guidance or on heights or on what can be where within the curb extension area or any additional area outside of a parking space that is being utilized by an installation. I think visibility issues are, with most of our installations where they are using additional space, it's because they're next to a bulb out, a curb extension. I think the main consideration there is probably whether we're permitting uses like tables in the area between curb ramps, sort of at the edge, and the visibility impacts on the side street approaches. There's at least one installation that's adjacent to a crosswalk that's not with a curb extension. That's further up Solano, and so we're currently proposing that they can use the parking space but can't use the wedge between the angled parking space and the crosswalk. That would improve that somewhat, but we could place more guidance or requirements with regards to that visibility concern. For the perimeter, we're pretty consistently range of 36 to 42 inches height is what we've seen in peer cities, and we're recommending being consistent with that. We are allowing to go higher potentially with a visually permeable additional height. There's at least some specify that it has to be fully clear, like plexiglass if you're going higher. We're requiring a reflective tape along the edges, and either the addition of K-rail or other substantial barrier, or the inclusion in the perimeter barrier of a heavy planter or something to that effect. We're also requiring wheel stops for angle space along the stall line, or parallel spaces 2 feet into the adjacent parking stall. Some questions to think about here: are the wheel stops worth requiring that the applicant install? Are they useful in guiding the adjacent vehicles and preventing those minor collisions? Some other jurisdictions are requiring flexible visibility posts, or the flexible bollard kind of at the corners or along the edges, particularly parallel parking spots. Our current use of cones in the buffer space and corners is what's currently serving both the visibility, which we're going to require on the barrier, but does provide some soft edge to the travel lane that a flexible post could. So we could consider adding that if the commission saw reinforcing that separation from the travel line is worth that additional element. There's also potentially some detail we could talk through around what qualifies as a substantial barrier. Planters with soil seems the most common. Some cities have focused the heavy barrier requirements on the side facing that are adjacent to the travel lane or facing the oncoming traffic. Others, the entire perimeter that's not adjacent to the sidewalk. San Francisco is the most specific one here, specifying an amount of force, 50 pounds per linear foot, and 200 pounds on a single load force. It doesn't discuss the design intent, but it seems to be geared towards the sturdiness from wind or weather, essentially not going to move it or cause a issue, and preventing someone from inadvertently entering traffic as with the 200 pounds at a particular spot. So that seems to be the design intent with the most specific example we found. For the platform, we are proposing requiring a freestanding platform. Currently, there are some installations that have a ramp down to the street level and some that don't have any ramp at this point. We're stating a preference for modular design to help with access and use over time, and requiring a 6-inch by 6-inch clear gutter space next to the curb to maintain drainage. For accessibility, we've included some details on accessibility requirements, seamless edge connection to the curb, a firm stable surface, the maximum in terms of gaps and slopes that are required for accessibility, as well as turning space and clear widths. For fire considerations, we're having a 5-foot buffer around fire hydrants. Any canopy, roof, or heaters are subject to fire department review, and that includes heaters needing to be 5 feet from anything flammable. Maintenance, we're proposing to require 3-stream waste bins in the facility where they're not busing tables as staff. There's requirements to keep the parklet and curb and gutter clear and clean, providing access to utilities as needed. And so, yeah, designing it to be able to do that easily, and noting that there is maintenance and work that happens in the street that the applicants need to be aware that that's subject to request for removal. For public access, we're proposing a different fee rate for bus stop parklets compared to private commercial parklets. And the related questions there are some jurisdictions that require public access during non-business hours, or requiring a public bench as part of the installation to provide public use. Requiring this kind of access would further limit the utility and potentially raise costs for the business, but it is a strategy some have used to balance this use of the public right away for commercial activity. So we've, I think, brought up these different options in the past where we're proposing allowing full commercial use, but wanted to raise that question here in case there's additional feedback on that. For the fees, we're proposing waiving or reimbursing, depending where we still need to figure out exactly how we would do that for this first fiscal year 22-23, and requiring installations to be transitioned into this program by the end of this year. And the fees would be our standard encroachment permit fee of $222 for either a bus stop parklet or commercial type, and then an annual fee for commercial of 750 vehicles, $750 per vehicle space per year. We came to this both by looking at benchmarks in peer cities and also doing a rough comparison with commercial rents in the area, and this amount is roughly comparable to 15% of the market value for indoor space. So that was our other check on developing the fee structure here. And one discussion question, because equity has come up in some of the business responses, is, is there a fee structure for higher grossing uses or alcohol sales, or some way to balance the benefit to a particular business and the overall district sort of impacts or uses. There's one example from what we looked at that had a varied fee structure. San Francisco had a doubled fee structure for businesses with over 2 million gross receipts. So that's one distinction that we found in the review of peer cities. For removal, the applicant must remove if it's not in use for 2 weeks, or they haven't made arrangements with us for longer, if the city or utility maintenance is needed, or within 15 days of termination or the permit or the business closing. We're proposing a 3-year permit period and subject to reapplication, assuming the continuation of the program. And questions here, is 2 weeks a good threshold there? We think that's reasonable, with the ability to make arrangements with the city if there's a need to go beyond that. There was some discussion earlier and some feedback related to season, like during the rainy season, if there's lower use, or holiday season sort of demand differences with other businesses. Should we be permitting the city to request removal for other purposes? It isn't in what we propose, but based on the feedback, we think we should still be asking ourselves that question if there's any other conditions we want to permit removal for. And with that, so next steps, we're planning to take this same presentation to Economic Development Committee next week. We're seeking commission recommendation or your direction to bring revisions back to you for action at this meeting or a subsequent meeting. We'll bring the proposal to City Council, prepare final application and guideline documents. And we're also proposing an interim review of the temporary installations, safety requiring potential removal or upgrade in advance of this end of 2022 window to apply for a permanent installation. We know there's concerns regarding what's out there. We want to give enough time for people to be able to come up with a permanent or more long-term installation and go through the process, but we understand there's still concerns with what we have today. So that's how we're proposing to address that. So with that, I know I threw a lot of questions out there for discussion. So again, if it works for the commission, I propose addressing questions and taking public comment, and then sort of going through them section by section to see what feedback you have tonight. And with that, I'll conclude.
Great. Thank you for that presentation. So this is a chance for commissioner questions. Please raise your hand, commissioners, and welcome Commissioner Rosario. Del Rosario, good to have you with us. I don't have any questions, and I'm not seeing others with questions. Commissioner Del Rosario.
Thanks, and thanks, Justin and staff, for such a thorough development of draft guidelines. I think you tried to cover all aspects of the program, which is great. I have some pretty specific questions. Let's see. Are there any parklets that are more than 3 spaces today?
I think 3 is the maximum.
Okay. Okay. And do we have any installations that are in other curb designations other than parking, like yellow curb, loading area, or limited parking?
I believe we have at least one in a green, like time limited parking space. I don't think we have anything in a loading zone.
Okay. Try to see what else. I might have missed this, but you had a question, or you had a concept for 5% of the seating would be dedicated towards ADA, and I don't know if there was any rhyme or reason to how that was selected.
I'll let Jeff field that one. That's more his expertise.
I believe that's the standard that exists in it for restaurants and indoor seating. So we basically be matching what's required indoors.
Okay, cool, good. And I think my last question is, what will the fees be used for? Are they going back to enforcing and keeping the program going for permit fees?
We haven't specified that in how we framed it. I think that is the intent that's been discussed. We, as a ballpark, assuming 10 installations came in at 2 spaces, we're talking maybe 15,000 a year kind of range. So there was some discussion about broader benefits, but it's going to be somewhat limited based on the amount of fee dollars coming in with this.
Right.
But I think the initial need would be on the reviewing permit applications and working with the applicants as the installations go in to make sure that they're conforming.
Okay. I think that's all of my questions. So thanks.
Great. Commissioner Graham.
I have a couple of questions. Have you thought or considered about guidelines relating to lighting?
Lighting concern that's come up has been fire safety, and so fire review of the proposal is how we've dealt with that. If that's the concern, that's the part of lighting that we've thought about at this point.
I'm sort of thinking about like visibility and access. I also think, yeah, okay, I'll wait on the other one. Do we have any thoughts about how we might address or even encourage like sharing of uses between different commercial spaces, which might, I don't know, maximize the utility in some way?
We have one current one that is a shared installation. I think part of the challenge is just the maintenance responsibility and whether we would still require one applicant to be taking on the lead role. I don't think there's anything we have that would limit the ability of multiple patrons to utilize it if they made those arrangements, but I think we need at least a business to be the applicant with the city for the encroachment. But we haven't spelled out any different provisions for a shared in terms of fee or in terms of other accommodations for it.
Okay, those are my questions.
I guess if the fees remain the same, regardless of the number of businesses, then there's an incentive for shared space. That seems, well, I'm sorry, I'm making a comment. Yes. Commissioner Peng.
I have 2 questions. I know first is the wheel stops. I'm wondering for all the case study cities, are they only requiring like wheel stops in parallel parking, or they also require wheel stops on angled parking? Because as I can see it, I don't think it's necessary to require wheel stops on angled parking. So this is my first question. Second is, Justin, you just mentioned the wedge space. I look at, on my way back, I look at some of the parklet. I think the angled parking provided really a weird shape, making utilization really inefficient. So maybe in our guideline, we can provide more specification and illustration on how to utilize and approve for the wedge space. That's all.
I can respond to the first question about the wheel stops. most other cities that have the wheel stop requirements have them for both angled and parallel parking spaces. I will note that generally, I think parallel parking is more common in other cities. We have pretty few parallel parking spaces on Solano. So I think for the most part, they're geared towards parallel parking in the other cities. And ours is really focused on the angled, but it does apply to both.
Great. I had a question about gutter maintenance at the long-term bus stop parklet that's been installed and in the COVID-related parklets. Do you have any feedback from Public Works on how it's been to have the gutter covered in places where it has been over time, and whether access is an issue on a regular basis or it's a long-term intermediate basis?
They have generally provided feedback that allowing the gutter flow and responsibility for cleanup onto the applicant works. They think the 6 by 6 inch amount of flow is sufficient on Solano. On the more permanent installation, I think the main feedback there is just needing, if we get more applications that are using concrete, which isn't what we're proposing here with this program, that they've dealt with all the issues with any outflows to the curb or any of the additional, not just the utility access, but all the sort of private connection points kind of thing. But for these, those wouldn't be impacted because we're not allowing any concrete to be poured or anything affixed to the surface.
Great. I've noted in Walnut Creek especially, they seem to have a standard for a gutter clear out area that's sort of piano hinged often, so it can just be opened up and cleaned out quickly and put back down. You know, a lot of our spaces are on a bit of an angle, but not all of them. Commissioner Del Rosario, did you have another question?
Yes, it was a follow-up to the tire stop question and comment. Do tire stops prevent cars from in high speeds from hitting and damaging parklets? So we hear them every so often, right? That you have parklets that get damaged from vehicles, drunk drivers, whatever it may be. Even locally, I think there was a one in downtown Oakland, I think 2 weeks ago, right by where I work, and it was damaged. And so, it normally isn't an issue because you have cars parked there, but I'm assuming when, businesses are closed and there's less cars on Solano Avenue, that there is that risk. And I don't know if tire stops do anything to mitigate for that or not.
Yeah, at least one of the peer cities referred to tire stops more in the heavier sort of barrier category. I must admit, I don't know a whole lot. I think it would take some of the force out of, but it wouldn't stop a vehicle. So I think it would help soften the blow, but it, like a curb for the sidewalk, it wouldn't prevent a vehicle from continuing. Right.
As we have seen in Albany.
Yeah, and we've seen that in real storefronts.
The curb has been jumped, and it doesn't even have that little angle on it like curb stops.
Right. Okay, thanks.
To add to that, I think another potential use of the wheel stops would be to prevent a car from kind of clipping a parklet as it's coming into park. So that'd be a much lower speed, but just kind of preventing a more minimal damage, but still potentially adding some safety benefit there.
How would that be angled and installed? I'm curious.
So the proposed location would be on the parking stall line. So the parklet would have to be a foot in on the space that's being used by the installation. And then the wheel stop would be along the white line, essentially.
In the area that people use to get around their cars, which might be a tripping hazard.
Yeah.
Okay. I need to mention that one of the reasons I brought up the distance of commissioners from Solano is that I live within 500 feet of Solano. Jeff, do you have any further opinion on that?
Yeah, I've been doing some quick research for the commission on this. I think you're okay. To kind of summarize a very complex law, it's the law says that you shouldn't participate in a decision that materially affects you financially. And there's some presumptions, and then there are exceptions to presumptions. There is a presumption that if something is happening within 500 feet of wherever you have a real estate interest, there's a presumption that you have an interest. If you're more than 1,000 feet away, there's a presumption you don't. And between 500 and 1,000, it's a gray area. One of the exceptions to all this is in developing policy that is for an area. So in this particular instance, I would say that participating in development and policy, as we're discussing here, is fine. If a particular project, a particular location were to come back to the commission and it involved something within 500 feet and possibly to 1,000 feet, depending on that gray area, which is not very well defined in the law, then I would recommend that you recuse yourselves in that particular situation for that particular permit. But for developing the policy, my quick read of, again, complex laws is that you're in a safe area here to work to develop the policy for the street as the corridor as a whole.
Great. Thanks for some clarity and for helping us make that more clear. All right, so are there any further commissioner questions? Not seeing any. It's time for public feedback, public comment. Again, we'll do 3 minutes and you use the raise the hand feature, and we'll take you in approximately the order that you raised your hand.
First up is Jeremiah.
Glad I'm the only one that didn't have this idea. You know, I love these parklets. I really think it's great for the community. It brings a lot of public space, a lot of public eating space, a lot of public usable space. I think it's great. I really do like these. I like them a lot. And I would just encourage, I was actually on Shattuck yesterday getting a new cell phone, and in front of Cricket Wireless, they have these public benches, these public seats. And there's this one I sat in, it's actually a public seat. It's just one chair for one person. And it was bolted to the ground, and it was so comfortable. And, you know, people can't sleep in those, you know, so it's not like people are going to sleep in them. But it was so nice just to sit down in a chair on. I just would think if we can incorporate maybe individual seats, they take up less room, and it's really nice. So I really love this project, and I just want to throw out there, maybe we can get some single seats, because benches sometimes take up too much room to put on a blueprint. And if we could have a single seat, that would be great. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'm not seeing any more raised hands at the moment.
Yeah. Okay, let's assume there's no more public comment. We'll bring it back to the commission for your recommendations and opinions. Who would like to, Commissioner Del Rosario, start us off?
Well, actually, Chair, I was wondering if would it make some sense to kind of go issue by issue, and then get feedback, since there's so much in the guidelines?
I have one other issue I'd like to bring up. while we're on the subject, having patronized the parklets and hung out on Solano a bit, especially during the pandemic, some of what I've seen is that having these spaces occupied consistently and especially during high volume times, the delivery drivers picking up or dropping off are forced into more marginal areas. Now, obviously, they're making a choice to park in areas that aren't legal or are a handicapped zone or whatever ADA parking space. But also the nature of the businesses has changed a bit, and especially during the pandemic, we really haven't addressed that kind of extremely short-term parking. And these spaces that we're talking about are located in front of the businesses that those drivers service largely. And I think it behooves us to think about creating additional short-term, extreme short-term parking in our restaurant areas.
Would it be helpful for me to put the slides back up, or just to state the section by section, or?
Let's start by stating section by section after Commissioner Peng has a chance to make a comment, and then if we need to refer, maybe we can bring the slides back up. I'm working on a very small screen, so it's others maybe as well.
Hi. So I think a lot of the discussion opinions about the parklet will be focused on parking. So I'm wondering if there's any data that shows the occupancy rate of the parking spot along the Solano Avenue, at least for the Albany section. And just want to add a good rule of thumb. It's not from me, but from Canway kind of researchers is usually if you keep it at 85% occupied, that's a good rule of thumb. I never see it occupied 85% actually. So any data would help to facilitate this conversation.
Yeah, we can. Jeff, do you want to feel that? We did present some of that data at a previous discussion.
I'd be happy to. We have been over the months collecting and doing parking surveys along Solano Avenue, and I'm sorry, I don't have the table at my fingertips here, but I can say that the trends initially, in the first, I'd say 9 months of the pandemic, parking occupancy was really quite low. There's plenty of parking. I would say as this, in the last probably 6 months, maybe a little longer, the occupancy rates have increased to the point where in the areas around, I would say from San Pablo to probably about Talbot, the occupancy rates have been closer to 90 or 95% during peak lunch hour times. Further east from there are a few spots that are, tend to have higher occupancy rates, but for the most part, if you go block by block or some sort of kind of moving radius as you go further east, you're seeing occupancy rates more in the 60 to 80% range is what I'm recalling the data showing. But right around the kind of the core of where Five Tacos is and some of the other restaurants and cafes and so forth, it's well over 85 pretty consistently.
I would say those numbers are probably about the same in the evening as well, in similar areas.
So when you survey it, do you just look at Solano, or are you looking at, I know it will be really additional work, but I think all the neighboring street, at least like one block, within 1 block of Solano, is a reasonable place for shoppers to. Just want to add that comment. Thanks.
Great. Commissioner Graham.
Just to facilitate, I guess I was going to say that I think it would be great if we could go to the end slide for each of the topics.
Great.
Pulling that back up. So the first section was parklet location and setbacks.
Okay, commissioners, strong opinions on setbacks and visibility restrictions from crosswalks and curb ramps.
And this also included the size, but was a little hidden, I think, in the question on frontage.
Right. I was just starting with the first bullet. Let's see, Commissioner Graham had her hand up before. Let's start with.
I was just going to say, I think this is pretty appropriate, especially given that we have bulb outs on a lot of the corners. I think that maybe we should just revisit, make sure that we're comfortable with the red zones that are painted in any area that doesn't have a bulb out. And, you know, maybe as part of this effort, just make sure that those are all sort of the way to our sort of our standard. But other than that, I think that what you have shown here seems, this to me is the easiest part. And then I just on the last bullet, the seating in the sidewalk areas, I just think we do need to make sure that we always say that, you know, there has to be the minimum space of travel, which I think is 4 feet or 5 feet. I can't remember, but, you know, sometimes I think seating in the sidewalk area is fine as long as there's like a clear path of travel. So those are my comments for this section.
Commissioner Graham, if I could just ask, it sounds like you're endorsing the illustrated San Francisco Spaces Manual specifications.
I'm what was here, like the 1 foot setback, 2 from the travel lane.
Great. Commissioner Del Rosario?
Yeah, for the most part, I agree with Commissioner Graham, both on the clearances. I think there's standards already for clear path of travel on sidewalks. It seems like we've already set up our angled parking spaces so that they do have the right visibility to intersections. And so if the parklets are staying within the footprint of the angled parking spaces, they are slightly taller than a vehicle, but we also allow tall vehicles to park in those spaces. So as long as those sight lines aren't impeded and those setbacks are accurate based upon how we set the parking spaces, then I think we're okay with putting parklets in parking spaces. I was wondering if we would consider having a 1 foot setback from the lane, just to try to choke down the lane a little bit more. I mean, there's a little bit of added risk there, I guess, with you know, more possibility of parklets getting damaged. But I think adding a 1 foot clearance will choke the lane down and have cars travel slower.
Can I just tear off that, because I think it's also, you need to be clear, especially if you're using those like K barriers, like is like where that you're measuring that from. Are you measuring it from the center or the edge, right? And so I think I don't necessarily have a comment in response to whether it's 1 foot or 2 foot, but I think you just have to make sure you're clear, because that's just can be a fair amount of space. Sorry to go out of line.
Well, that's all right. We're trying to have a discussion. It's not kindergarten. Commissioner Peng, are you ready to comment on this? I'm sorry, you dropped off my screen.
No, I just want to continue that conversation. So it seems to me that we allowed 14 feet for travel lane, one direction, correct?
That's correct. It's angled parking spaces. It's 30 feet from the curb to the center line. So we generally, when we've talked about the bulb outs or prior bus stop parklets, we've wanted to accommodate 14 feet.
Okay, so if I understand Commissioner Rosario's suggestion of moving, kind of having one buffer, so narrow down the travel lane 1 feet, I think that's a great suggestion. And possibly when we install any new parklet, we might just want to put a stripe over there just to make sure the drivers are aware of it. And for the rest of it, I agree with the other commissioners.
Great. Almost everything that's been said is within my idea for what's right as well. I don't support the rolling barriers. I'm sorry, I'm in trouble with the terminology. The wheel stops. I don't support extra wheel stops. I think the K-rail on the area fronting the street is hopefully sufficient, as long as the parklet is not thrust out at one end onto the street, exposed on a corner without a bulb out. And I would like to keep those low-lying barriers out of the area that people are walking around their cars or walking near the sidewalk. I do support flexible bollards as a more permanent solution than traffic cones. That seems like a good soft way to buffer. Let's see. Did others have additional comments on the other bullets on this page? This would be good to. Commissioner Del Rosario?
I think Commissioner Graham first.
No, I think the K-rails is in the next section, or was it in this section? Because that's what I have a comment on.
It's in the next section.
Okay, then I will.
Barrier. Yeah.
So if I could add, it sounds like because we didn't mention anything, it seems like we're all okay with 2 to 3 parking spaces per parklet. I think that's a more equitable proposal, and there are different footprints for different businesses, and so I don't know if that should play a factor. So I like the idea of having 2 and then 3 if you want to request it, as opposed to trying to cover the whole storefront width.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Also about the third bullet point, limit parklets to the store frontage. Is there any cases along Solano that we need to shift a little bit? I remember there's one near the Cornell Elementary School. I think it's iSlice. I think they have their parklets slightly off their frontage. I think we should provide flexibility for retail.
Yeah, so the limiting the frontage was an alternative. The current proposal is the 2 to 3 spaces, but not limited in location compared to the applicant.
I too like the flexibility, and there are restaurants on Solano that have 0 parking spaces in front of them. So they definitely would only have access in some cases with offset parklet.
And just to be clear on the feedback For the wheel stops, I know the focus is on angle parking. We do have one installation currently that's on a parallel spot. Is the not wanting wheel stops also for a parallel space adjacent, or is it just a consideration for getting in and out of a vehicle from an angled parking spot?
From my standpoint, I would want to use wheel stops in parallel parking situations. I think it is important in that case. Any other commissioner comments on that specific issue? Okay, Commissioner Graham, are you ready to go on to the next slide? Or would you like to comment on this slide?
Yes, apologies. I did not realize my hand was still up. Thank you.
No problem. Keeps us moving along. So we talked about some of this.
Yeah, could we go back and I'll make my comment about the K-rail,
Great.
whatever they're called, K-rail. I think we need to be careful here, right? Because the design that you're showing is not something that is going to be support an elevated platform, which is the other part of your design, right? So I don't think, or unless you're intending to put it in front, and then again, you're sacrificing some of that distance. So I just think that perhaps there needs to be a little bit more thought here, because if you're asking for it to be elevated, you're essentially either then you're asking something to be put in front of the elevated space, which then we're creating more of a setback, or you're influencing sort of the structural design of it. And so I guess I'm not quite satisfied by that barrier. I think it needs a little bit more thought.
Yeah, the intention here, just to be clear with what we're trying to communicate, this was just a sketch, is either some kind of railing or wall and a substantial barrier independent of that, or integrated together. A number of them use like a planter or something with soil filled or rock filled that's serving both at the same time. But that we should discuss that.
Yeah, I mean, I personally don't want to go down into pounds per square foot or something like that. I think, and this gets to sort of one of my end points, which is I think that this is going to take a fair amount of staff, a little bit of back and forth, and what are we asking for them to submit for a permit, just to sort of so that they don't go too far down a design. And so, yeah, if that's the intent, I think that we need to just provide a little bit more guidance on the intent rather than the design feature, but then staff, is going to have to be responsible for approving whatever it is that's proposed. So.
Yeah, and is the setback for the wall, or is it for the K-rail, or?
The setback would be before anything starts. So
Okay.
It would be on the design to try to, see how efficiently they can provide a barrier and seating within the space for allowing them to put things in.
Other commissioner comments on these issues? Moving along.
So part of the, just to follow up on that before we move on, if I may, if we are concerned about the amount of space that's being taken up, some jurisdictions don't require the substantial barrier level at the entire perimeter except the sidewalk. Some focus on what's next to the travel lane or what's facing the incoming traffic. So that is one way to allow more flexibility on how much can be used for tables versus requiring it from the full non-sidewalk perimeter. So if there's any feedback on that, welcome to it. Understand we do need to get a little more specific in our guidance to folks.
Can I clarify what I think I heard you just say? What you were saying was some places only have that guidance for what's on the roadway side and not the full like three-sided. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct. Michelle, jump in if I'm misstating, but
Yeah, there are some that just require it kind of along the roadway and some that require it basically facing the oncoming traffic. So just on one side of the parklet rather than all the way around.
I mean, I guess my response to that is for the angled parking, I would see that as being appropriate, especially. I think it would be okay, and it's more of the parallel parking, like where we would put the curb stops, is where you want to have a little bit more protection. That's my, and I'm done talking.
Other commissioners? Commissioner Del Rosario.
Thanks. And I agree with Chair McCloskey and Commissioner Graham on the wheel stops. I think just generally, we should try to it's a tough balance between making sure that these parklets are accessible and safe versus trying to minimize the cost for the restaurant, with the business owner. And I think many of these businesses, probably this park is this parklet on San Francisco. A lot of the parklets in San Francisco are quite elaborate, but probably because they're also in front of some pretty well-established businesses. And I think Solano Avenue does have some regional draw, but it's also mainly local businesses. And so I imagine a wheel stop is probably a few $100s at least. And to have to line up all of them for around your site, just for minor incidences is probably not the best use of dollars for the business owner. So I agreed that we should put them where they're going to be used and not necessarily where we're just trying to be over abundantly cautious. And that goes with kind of everything in this. It's really just that balance of, if we're looking at a platform and wheel stops, other safety features, the barrier around, these can easily get into the tens of thousands of dollars. And I don't think there's many businesses on Solano that would be able to afford that.
I'm getting this vision of one of those armadillo bumps poking his nose out from underneath the parklet. But that's just my sense of humor. And I will, just to clarify my earlier statements, I support protection facing the traffic lane and at least a wheel stop facing parallel parking and possibly more reinforcement. For example, on this parklet facing the traffic direction, incoming direction. That'd be a really good place to put like a server station, with all the dirty dishes. And then when something hits it, you really notice. Okay. Other comments on the bullets on this slide before we move on? Seeing none, please advance.
so we didn't pose any specific questions here. I think the main consideration is currently we allow ramping down and platform. We're proposing requiring platform. But unless there are comments, yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry.
Don't apologize. Just
well, I guess, why would we not allow a ramp? Because to me, that's just back to Commissioner Del Rosario's point. Like, I could see, I don't know how much this costs, but if you just think about the amount of materials that a ramp could be a lot more fiscally achievable than a raised platform.
Right,
mean,
like
so-
you were thinking of a small ice cream shop as opposed to a fancy dinner place.
I mean, I think I think that we're trying to strike a balance here, just of like not being too overly prescriptive, but like ensuring safety and accessibility. And I guess it's sort of, if it serves the right purpose and if it were to meet ADA standards, and they're going to maintain the curb and gutter, then I guess I'm wondering if there's like an ADA reason or something that's made us decide to have a freestanding platform, because if there isn't like an accessibility reason, I think it just, we need to try to be flexible so that we can keep a lot of what we have out there. Because I think a lot of the things that we have out there right now, if we're requiring a raised platform, that doesn't exist, right? So that's like a new sunk cost that they're going to have to go out and do. So I'm all about, if it's an accessibility issue and we can't like pencil it, then that makes sense to me. But if it's just about curb and gutter or I don't know, aesthetics, then I guess I would push back on this a little bit more. So I'm done.
I
Other
can
thoughts?
just say that I know only New York City of the cities I looked at does allow ramps. All the other ones, which are all in California, require platforms. But Jeff might know more specifics about the ADA requirements there.
I think it's a question, I think theoretically a ramp should be fine. It needs to meet the slope requirements and the widths. What would end up happening is a fair amount of the area of the parklet would be dedicated to the ramp rather than dedicated to seating for patrons. So, it would be a less efficient use of the space, but theoretically it could be made to work for accessibility. But we would have to make sure that it's got that 5% slope, and that can take some space to make that ramp and then give enough at a landing at the end for a person in a wheelchair to turn around and get to their table or something like that.
Yeah, and I mean, when they have the angled parking, though, aren't we sometimes there is a little bit of a bonus space that is there? Or I guess all I'm saying is that maybe we just say that it needs to be accessible, and then they need to come to you with the design, and it's either their seating space or I don't want it to be cost prohibitive, I guess is what I'm getting at.
We can certainly. Sorry, go ahead, Justin.
The one thing I was going to add is with a path, there's a cross slope and a running slope. With space like this, it's a little trickier, and it's a roadway that they're going to need to be doing the measurements in the roadway to know whether they can use the road surface here versus constructing a platform that they know is going to meet those requirements. It gets a little trickier using the existing.
Oh, I'm sorry. So you're talking about the actual, not the accessibility, but the actual
it's
floor space, essentially.
Not just the ramp, it's the surface once you're down the ramp, that if you're constructing a platform, you've designed to do that versus using the roadway as it's out there now.
And I guess I have another question. I'm sorry if I'm taking up all the space, but what if there is available seating on the sidewalk? Like, for instance, in front of the Thai place, right? There's seating there on the sidewalk. And then there's also the seating in the parklet area. And if we're saying that 5% is that minimum, then is there a way to also, maintain an accessible table for people who sort of need it at those times and have that be like the portion? I don't know if that's quite follows with ADA like guidance or not, because I do understand it's sort of separate but equal, or maybe,
right.
Anyway.
I think that could work in many cases. It is important that it be part of the area and not to make it feel like, oh, if you're in a wheelchair, you have to go sit over on the other side or something like that. As long as it's incorporated into it, and that's essentially the solution that's in place today, right? If a person in a wheelchair wants to enjoy outdoor seating right now, and they can't get off the curb, off the sidewalk onto the street level, that a table would have to be made available to them on the sidewalk.
I too like the flexibility and the low cost aspect of allowing ramps. And especially in a situation where you don't know when the utility access is needed. Buying a modular system is going to be presumably somewhat expensive. And if you build it yourself and then you have to rip it up, or you get a rat infestation along the curb, I don't know, it seems like that there's a real jump in barrier to entry and continued use that could be solved for a smaller location that doesn't need as much of the space with a ramp. Commissioner Del Rosario.
Yeah, thanks. I think you'll also get some of the slope addressed with the crown of the road. So you should be able to shorten the ramp that way. I think a lot of these bus bulbs or ped bulbs that you put in, you always end up with a very short curve because they're extending out 8 feet into the roadway. And so hopefully you'll get some savings or some benefit to having the slope be accessible that way. A question I had was, say Kim's Cafe for an example. I think that one is a parklet that's on the roadway. What would happen in this situation? Would the city have to have that parklet be removed?
For what circumstance? Sorry, I didn't catch.
Because it's not on, if you're requiring a platform, right? So I think the way that the guidelines are written now, the draft guidelines, you're asking for a platform. So would that mean if you're not in compliance, you'd have to get your parklet removed?
That would be, you would need to remove or submit an application and come into compliance at the end of the year is what we're proposing.
Yeah.
So
I think, the sacrifice of some space for a ramp versus, being unable to afford a platform. I think it's a better trade-off to just allow businesses to just try to put a ramp in.
Sorry, I got distracted. Any closing out comments? Are there additional slides to look at? Great.
ADA we discussed, unless there's additional comments on that. Fire, we didn't have any questions for you unless you have comment on that. Maintenance elements. Public access, we did pose some questions here. Again, we're proposing the bus stop parklet scenario that we have a couple of installations. Otherwise, we're allowing what's currently there as full commercial use, but there are a couple of other approaches that other jurisdictions have taken requiring public use and access when the business isn't using it, or requiring a public component of the installation.
Commissioner Del Rosario.
And for staff, the bus stop parklets, those are open to the public all the time, correct?
That's correct. The two that came in as bus stop parklets were proposed to be open all the time. This would be a slight difference from that, allowing public component for the bus stop provision, bus area provision, but commercial activity for the other components.
Okay, so those would almost be treated slightly differently then, it seems, in terms of the public access during the daytime.
That's correct. This would be slightly different than the rules that those first two were brought under or approved under. The consideration here, I think, is if we're allowing now commercial activity in these scenarios, does that change how we treat the bus stop parklet? So we're proposing it by bringing those into alignment with the fee schedule version of this, but we could also continue to have a full public requirement and not have a lower fee just for incentivizing providing a bus shelter and keep them separate.
I think I generally agree that we should provide public access during daytime non-business hours. I don't know if we have to have the business require public seating. I don't think that's necessary, but I think since it's in public right away, it should be a public good.
I wonder if it gets a little sticky.
It could, yeah.
Commissioner Peng, I see your hand, and I want to honor that. But let me just
go ahead.
Do a little back and forth here. You know, if I come and park my bike because there's no furniture there because it was taken in, and then they want to come out and do dinner service and my bike is there, you know, if there's no seating because we require that portable furniture be, you know, I'm sorry, I'm not sure if we require that, but if you know, portable furniture, I think, has to be taken in, and as soon as a business would want to be, they would want to lock it up, so that probably wouldn't naturally be available. To me, the bus stop parklets are a long-term solution that has gone through at least the ones we've done so far went through a lot of design iterations and a lot of design work and back and forth with the city to develop that public-private interface and to provide seating that is robust and long-term, unlike, you know, tables and chairs that can be moved around. So they're kind of different animals. You wouldn't naturally stand or sit in a parking space, I don't think, that didn't have a car in it at the time. And of course, it's also public space. I agree, but a little difficult.
Yeah. No, I think those are really good points, and the challenging one to address. I think these are going to be permanent, though, right? They'll have some permanence to them, and that's why we're doing this program. I just think it's otherwise we're providing an easement for the businesses to take public space and use it for their at their discretion. But yeah,
I agree. I agree with that. I mean, what if we just and this is going against what I said before, we're saying don't overly prescribe the design, but if a bench along the back is part of the rail, right, that can be seating during the day, and then it's just a bench, so we could have some sort of requirement that some amount of seating is sort of available for the public in non-business hours, right? Something to that effect, I guess.
What if we said something like, if you provide permanent seating, it must be available to the public during non-business hours?
I think that's good.
Commissioner Graham, are you thinking that you'd like to see a mandate to provide public seating for sure?
No, I haven't thought this through. So I think Commissioner Peng has his hand raised.
Commissioner Peng, do you want to chime in on this discussion?
So I'm concerning about the business owner's cost, because so maybe we can provide incentivize people to provide public seating if we can lower the fee or something. to cut this. And also, if you allow furnitures to be used after business hour, there is a cost associated with it to cleaning it, right, before the business hour. So maybe we shouldn't be over prescriptive and allow the business owner to make the decision. And also provide different tiers of pricing for our fee. That's all.
I think that's a great idea.
That sounds good. Commissioner Del Rosario, how does that strike you?
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay. Commissioner Peng, you have had your hand up. Do you want to go next?
Sorry.
Don't apologize. No.
Okay. No. I forgot to click it.
No problem. Okay. Staff, is there another slide? Great. So the annual fee is probably the spot where we might offer an incentive for the applicant to offer permanent seating. Commissioner Graham?
Well, I don't have I didn't want to talk about that, so.
That's okay.
I was just going to say, the only thing I wanted to say here is I think that you should build something into this to have the first, 3 years as being a trial period to try to understand what you think. I mean, like staff and city, you should try to track the amount of time and hours you spend, so that at the end where we come across even, right? So you should reserve the right to revisit these fees after a trial period so that we're not burdening. Oh, that was my watch. Sorry. So that we're not burdening ourselves, I think that's all.
I don't have any further specifics on what the incentive or the amount of public seating to be made available might be. It does sound like a good initiative. I like Commissioner Graham's idea of having a break-in period, if you would, and some kind of review. Other commissioner comments? Yeah, Del Rosario.
Did staff come across any examples of programs with financial assistance? I'm just thinking of on Solano, I think you have that mix of family-owned restaurants and also probably investor-owned restaurants. And I think there's going to be one restaurant that's going to have an advantage to put in a parklet versus another.
So we are looking at using COVID relief business support funds to provide opportunity to help recoup some of the costs. So we're still working on that, but we are looking at trying to support businesses. This is continuing to be a response to COVID and supporting businesses that are impacted by COVID. So we think that could help with some of the costs that are going to be associated with this, but that we're still working on.
That's the cost of the parklet itself, the construction costs and design or whatever?
It could be towards our fees. That's partly why we said fees waived or reimbursed, because we're still figuring out how this would roll out, but we are hoping to be able to help defray the cost of upgrading these installations to continue to provide outdoor seating.
I think it goes partly in hand with what Commissioner Graham was saying with the 3-year pilot, but it seems that the cities, the possible way that the city can help and then use those dollars for somewhere else is to waive permit fees or discount them for those that need it. And then the COVID assistance dollars can go towards design and construction subsidies.
And your threshold there would just be sort of the scale of the business.
Yeah, I think I saw some peer review of revenue receipts. I'm not sure, right? I also don't want to penalize, I mean, it's a small amount of money, I guess, but I also don't want to penalize a very successful family-run business.
This sounds like a topic for the development, Economic Development Commission, which also brings me to Public Member Jeremiah. I do see your hand. You have had a chance to comment on this item. It's going to be at the Economic Development Commission. You could have a chance to comment on it there, and we'll come back to us as well, and you'll have a chance then too. So we'll continue with commissioner comments.
Assuming that was all the comment for fees, the questions here were just if there's feedback on the, not in use for more than 2 weeks, or if we should continue to consider some of the other feedback we got around seasonality or other times and removing for other purposes other than accessing utilities or construction work. That kind of thing.
I have a question. There doesn't seem to be a provision for a seasonal pop-up. Is that kind of what you're talking about, or 2 season, 3 season?
I was thinking in terms of when we could ask installation to be removed, but that proposing a shorter term going in, we haven't thought about, I guess, with these draft guidelines. We have had and permitted a couple sort of short-term requests for 1 or 2 day kind of thing as a regular encroachment permit, but more in the line of these
Right.
kind of in-parking installations.
I don't know if that's something that might get requested, but if you think about it, like maybe a 3-month permit for the holidays, perhaps. I don't know. Commissioner Del Rosario.
Yeah, that's a good point about the pop-up question. I was thinking of it more in terms of, I guess, like if a business abandoned their parklet or something like that, or if a business closes and then you have the parklet still remaining. If it's substantial infrastructure, I'd hate to see that be removed. And I don't know if there's a judgment that the city can make to keep it and maintain it until a new business comes in, or the city just takes it on, right? And it's another parklet that the city has. Then there's a big difference there between whether or not we have just a ramp and some AstroTurf versus something like a platform that is could be a nice asset if it's not used by the business anymore.
At least one of the other cities did specify, if the business transfers ownership, there's an opportunity to transfer it rather than having to close, but they had to do one or the other, but it provided a little more flexibility than we've drafted it so far.
It's interesting, if a restaurant goes out of business, then, the restaurant was the applicant. If there's a 2-week term, or if there's a 15-day termination, timeline, once the restaurant closes, then the landlord is attempting to lease the space to another restaurant, and the parklet could be seen as an amenity associated with that, along with what Commissioner Rosario is saying. I like the first bullet parenthesis. I think that gives staff a lot of flexibility. And certainly they could judge to some extent from relations with landlords or businesses in the past. I think that's important. 2 weeks as a baseline seems pretty short to me, but that I'd like to get some feedback from staff on that. Was 2 weeks something that was seen in other cities' specifications?
I don't know that we saw a comparison. That was more to address with the concerns we were hearing, I think, more from the survey in terms of seeing underutilized spaces and wanting to have some parameters around that.
It's hard because, we were just talking about the difference between kind of a light parklet and a decked parklet. And there are all kinds of differentiation within those categories. But so, if a business pulled up stakes and left a bunch of rusty chairs and fencing without a deck, then yeah, sure, you'd want to clean that up pretty quickly. If the business left a much more substantial and perhaps amenity of a parklet, then you'd want to leave that as long as possible in case it could be reused. So again, I want to leave a lot of room for staff. Commissioner Peng.
Just want to second Mikrowski's opinion, because especially nowadays there's a labor shortage. At least personally, I can't find any labor or people to come in to fix anything in my house within 2 weeks. So I'm not sure how it's possible to get things removed within 2 weeks. So I would love to see more flexibility. And also, as I suggested earlier, if there's an incentive for permanent furniture for public use, I would love to see it being kind of handed over to the city if appropriate mechanism can be established. That's all.
Okay. Commissioner Peng, why don't you take your hand down? Have we talked this one out? Are there any other comments on this slide? Let's move along.
That was all our discussion questions for you.
Okay.
You made it through the gauntlet.
Thank you for asking specific questions. Commissioner Graham.
Sorry, when you do come back, I think there's just, it would be good to know about the process in terms of like permitting. And I mean, I think I would summarize a lot of this conversation as trying to be as flexible as possible and also give staff, flexibility and the ability to make some of those decisions on behalf of these guidelines. And then I actually do think we might need to think a little bit about lighting because especially in the winter, a lot of these places are open at night and it is dark on that lower part of Solano. It's not always, different spots, but just if you could look at that, that I would love to see that in the next iteration.
So just to clarify, you're thinking of, actual lights as opposed to like the reflective lining?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You think more on the sidewalk side and in the parklet itself, perhaps, or not?
Sorry, say that again.
I see the difference between, lighting for safety on the outside and lighting for safety on the sidewalk side and inside the parklet.
Yeah, I think that, even, and maybe this is like getting too prescriptive, but even like the big bulbs that they have on the inside, like they shouldn't be like completely dark spaces. I think I live, as we've established, right next to Solano. And like, I love the fact that like, when I drive up and down there at night, there's a lot of lighting. It also helps me like just know where things are and visibility. And I think it brings a lot of like character and sort of just like coziness to them. And so I think that maybe we just should figure out a way to encourage all of them to have some level of lighting as part of their design of the space. or at least look and see if anybody else does. And if no one else does, you can convince me that this is not needed. But
Well, I would start with, requiring them to avoid blocking the majority of the light coming from light posts to the sidewalk and hopefully to the parklet itself. I know that I think Jeff has spoken previously about how getting power to the parklets can be challenging. And that again increases the complexity. But lighting is a valid point.
whenever you ask people what they want at a BART station, the number one thing is lighting. People really like light. It has a major impact on how people perceive space.
There are a lot of solar activated options these days that could be part of the solution. Other final thoughts from the commission? I'm not seeing any. Great. Well, thanks for all the thoughts and the presentation. And I think we'll close it with that and look forward to hearing what the other commission says and seeing the next iteration. Thank you. Our next item, and perhaps Justin, you could bring the verbiage up, is a resolution thanking our most recent former commission member.
1 second.
Commissioner Fong. And we have some draft language, but we can adjust it if anybody wants to add to it. I believe at this point we do need to have public comment. Do you have a question or a recommendation, Commissioner Del Rosario? Because I think we should wait for.
It'll be a comment, so I can wait.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any members of the public who have comments on this item? And we have Jeremiah. Looks like you can go ahead.
Thanks. I just want to say thanks, Ben, for all your work serving the community. You know, nobody gets paid to be on these committees or commissions. It's all volunteer work. And I just appreciate your compassion and your hard work and due diligence to bring your education and your knowledge and wisdom forward for our community. So I just want to say thank you very much and good luck.
Great. Seeing no others, I will bring it back to the commission. Commissioner Del Rosario, you had a comment?
Yeah. I'd be willing to approve the put a motion to approve the resolution or support the resolution. I thought it would be it should include that he was a big advocate for making the Parklet program permanent. So maybe we can add that into on that second recital.
Great. I'm getting nods.
I second.
Commissioner Graham seconds. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask Mr. Freed to take a roll vote.
Commissioner Del Rosario,
Aye.
Commissioner Peng,
Aye.
Vice Chair Graham,
Yes.
Chair McCost.
A yes, and thank you to the former commissioner. With that, the motion passes, so we'll get that taken care of and off to him. bit of the changing the guard. It's good to have, new people showing up and bringing fresh blood. And yes, I'm vamping until I can bring the agenda up on my screen. With that, we have interesting. I think actually at this point we talk about future agendas, which I think got cut from the one of the versions of the agenda online. So this is a chance for our new commissioner, especially. This is where we take things that have come up during this meeting, things that have come up offline, public comments earlier in the meeting, and propose future agenda items and ask potentially when things might come up on the agenda. Mr. Freed, to your knowledge, are there scheduled items that we can expect to see in our next agenda?
We expect additional paving program items to be coming up, and next presentation from the local road safety planning effort.
Great. Are there any other requests from commissioners for agenda items? Seeing none. And by the way, just for full disclosure, the agenda is basically set by the chair or in their absence, the vice chair in discussion with staff before the next meeting. So even though I haven't brought up things, I may bring them up with staff. With that, I'll close this item. And with that, we will close the meeting. And our next meeting will be Thursday, May 26th. And there is some possibility of meetings switching in the next few months to in person for commissioners. There are some provisions for distance participation that we can discuss if it comes up, if you're a commissioner and you need to be somewhere else. But in general, we will be attending, and the city is attempting to come up with some kind of balance between citizen participation in person and remotely. And we'll have more information as it's available.
Currently, it's looking like June at the earliest for in-person for the commissioners. So we were told we should not put a location on the upcoming agenda, but last I heard, I would expect to be remote for the next meeting still.
Terrific. Well, I look forward to those days and meeting at least two of the commissioners in person. And with that, we'll say good night and look forward to seeing you all at the next meeting. And thank you for your work.
And thanks, staff. I thought the guidelines were really good. I know that's hard work, and I meant to say that during that topic. So good work. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.